Hello and welcome to part 3 of this sketching series. My name is Anat and I work as a product designer and I like to sketch on the side. And in this episode we will be going over shadows, how to draw them correctly, and what to think about when making your shadows. I think that shadows can be drawn quite intuitively as you sketch for a long time. So the more you sketch, the easier it will get for you to recognize how a shadow should be placed. But in this video, I will be going over some simple methods that you can use to cast your shadows and how to make them believable even if you have a bit more of a complicated object. And they don't always need to be 100% correct to be believable, and you can often simplify your shadows far more than what you think. So let's talk about some of the easiest methods that you can use to cast your shadows to bring your sketches to life a bit more. Putting shadows in your sketches can also feel like your sketch is much more grounded, and it can give your product or your object a sense of weight as to which ground plane it's being contacted on as well. Imagine we have a scene with just a cube and a flashlight. The flashlight's shining light on the cube, and the cube is casting a shadow on the ground. But how do we know exactly where that shadow is supposed to land? What's the technique to doing that? Now the secret to this is that if we imagine straight lines going from the light source through the cube and then hitting the ground, the corners of the cube will be always in a straight line between the light source and the corner of the shadow. So we can approximate that by just drawing straight lines from the light source. And they will hit the corners of the shadows. But sometimes in product design sketching, you don't have your light source this close to your object. The light source is sometimes the sun, which is really, really far away. And the sun is so far away that we can approximate all the shadows as being parallel to each other. All these lines don't have to go in different directions, or we don't have to use a ruler to trace them from the light source. Instead, we can just use what is called the triangle method, where we draw a triangle from all the corners of these objects and then trace that to the ground plane. And that becomes where the corners of our shadows are as well. Now let's apply this knowledge to the real world by sketching on some pen and paper. And you can follow along with me. Grab a sheet of paper and a pen, and we'll do this exercise together. Draw 2 cubes on a piece of paper, and then we'll try to apply the shadows both from a point light, which is close by, and then a sun lamp, which would be far away. So remember, in the first cube, the lines will go from the light source through the cube onto the ground plane. So now that you have your 2 cubes, we'll use the cube on the left for point light, which is close by our object, and then do more of a sun lamp on the right cube. And then we'll compare how the shadows look like with each other. Here I'll mark the 3 corners of the cube to show which edges of the shadow they're gonna create once we pass the light through them. So here goes the first line from the light source through the corner of the cube and onto the ground. And the second one. And the third one. Since the shadow is cast by the cube, we're going to make it in the same perspective, so going towards the same vanishing point as the cube when we draw the shadow. You don't really need to worry about exactly where in between those two lines you should draw the edge of your shadow. It will sort of look alright wherever you do draw them. Same thing as the perspective is applicable when drawing the shadow on the back. That will also follow whatever perspective it's supposed to be in. And now we can just connect the shadow to our object. You may notice that the shadow is being cast at different angles from the different corners of the cube, and this is because the light source is so close to our object that it becomes much wider. So this is how a shadow will look like when being cast from a point light source which is quite close to the object. And you can see the angles of the shadow being cast from the cube, from each corner. I'll draw the angles here. They all have different angles, depending on which angle the light source is hitting that corner from. And the angle will actually get wider the further along it is on the x-axis away from the light. Now if we just use the sun lamp and we can approximate all the angles to be the same, making the shadow is far easier when making your product design sketches. So I recommend that you do most of it with the sun lamp. So now we don't even need to trace the lines all the way from the sun lamp. We can just take it from the corners of our object and then bring them to a ground plane by making them all the same length as well. And then in the same way as we did on the other cube actually, we just follow the perspective to create the edge of the shadow, and then in the end we'll connect them to the cube as well. You may notice that if you make all the angles of the shadow being cast from the object the same, then the two lines that go connecting to the cube, they will also be parallel. Well, fantastical and magical. Now you have made your own two cubes with two different methods of projecting your shadows. Now let's do it with a bit more of a complicated object. Now we can do the same exercise with the cylinder to see how the shadow of a rounded shape looks like. And don't worry, with this one we also have assistance, and using the same method that we used for the cubes, we should be able to create a realistic shadow for this sort of object as well. If you draw a line straight down from the light source, you can find where the floor is, and from the floor we can have a line in the direction of the shadow through the center of the object, so the center of the cylinder in this case. Then we can find the lines which are tangent to the sides of the bottom of the cylinder, and that's how the shadow will expand from our perspective. Now let's trace from the center of the top of our cylinder to know where the center of the circle in the shadow should be around. And of course our shadow is also in perspective, so the long axis of the circle in the shadow should be in the same perspective as the long axis in the cylinder that we have. Usually the exact placement of the edges and things in the cylinder is just done by feeling a bit more, and most shadows are drawn by feeling as well, but we can double check by throwing a guideline between the edges of the cylinder and the edges of the shadow to see if they match. And that would be a pretty basic way to find how a shadow should be made, depending on how your shape looks like. Now let's do another cylinder, but this time we can imagine that there's a sun lamp somewhere, and we'll do this one with the triangle method. So this is much more simple, straightforward for the cylinder, where we just make triangles from the edges which the sunlight hits at a tangent, and then we expand that into the shadow and then create a circle at the end from the top of the cylinder, which it is casting a shadow on the ground. Great, now you made shadows in different points as well, here with a single point lamp and as well as a sun lamp. And you can see that the shadow made by the single point lamp, it's a bit more wider, dramatic, and the shadow made with the triangle method, it's a bit more simpler to make, easier and faster. So now we'll go on to a bit more of a complicated object, go for a bit of a challenge. Okay, here I have already prepared a sketch for us to look at the shadows for. So this might be some sort of water dispenser or a coffee machine or something. It doesn't matter. But anyways, there's places in here which can be a bit difficult to think how to make the shadows for. So that's what we're gonna do together. And I'm also going to link a PNG or printed sheet thing. So if you want to print this out yourself and try to make your own shadows, maybe move the light source and make the shadows from another place, then you can try and do it yourself. And otherwise you can follow along with me as I create the shadows from one lighting source for this object. And you can see I've made an arrow for the direction of the shadow. And so the shadow moves in that direction if the light is on the left side, for example. So that's what we're doing in this case. And you can see that there's a tangent as well for the shadow. So the shadow starts just where the tangent is towards that direction, at the edge of the bottom layer of this water cooker or coffee machine or such. And we're making lines in that direction from the ground plane, which are the same length. So since the height of the bottom part of this machine is all the same height, so the shadow will also be the same length from the near side as well as the far side from us. So first we'll think about how the bottom part of the machine creates a shadow, and then we'll go to the top part of the machine as well and see how the shadow projects on the ground for that. So now that we know how the bottom half of the machine casts a shadow on the ground, we'll see how the top of the machine casts a shadow on the inside of the machine. We can check where on the inside of the machine the top half will cast the shadow by following the same principles, because the shadow will be at the same angle if we're going to estimate a sun lamp. So the inside of the machine can be in shadow in that part where that angle meets from the top half of the machine. Here we'll make an approximation as well to where the top of the object connects with the ground in the shadow. And good to give it some height because of the thickness of the object before going to the circular part. Here I messed up a bit actually. I wanted to make it a bit taller, but in sketches like this mistakes are fine as well. It's part of the process, so don't worry about erasing it or something. Just draw over it if you make mistakes. But now for a fun part, filling in the shadows with the parts that are supposed to be in the dark. So we're going to do some hatching on those parts, making some straight lines like we learned in the first episode, to fill in the shadows with. The whole back of the object is in shadow right there, so I'm going to fill that in with the hatches, and then once we get to the curved bit at the bottom, I'm gonna change the angle of the hatches a bit to also show that it's a different surface. We can also make the right side of the machine, the part facing away from the light. We can add some darkness there, and we're gonna do it with a sort of a gradient where we're gonna make part of it which is closer towards the light with hatches which are further apart from each other, and then we're going to go back on the part more away from the light, and we're gonna make those parts even darker. And then finally we can fill in the part of the shadow cast by the upper half of the machine. The shadow will make a bit lighter than the one which is closer to the machine, to show that it falls off as it goes further along. So there we have it. Hopefully you have a bit better of an idea on how to make shadows in product design sketching with these two methods that we've learned today. And yeah, keep on practicing. Well, that's it for this video. Hopefully you learned a thing or two on how to make your shadows a bit better in product design sketching, and hopefully you can apply this knowledge to your own sketches as well. So yes, do like and subscribe to the channel. Alright, thank you, goodbye.